And welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight, more details emerge about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
Meanwhile, Americans are urged to flee Lebanon amid escalations with Israel.
And the national debt tops a staggering $35 trillion. But first, we begin in D.C., where President Joe Biden addressed the nation last night, outlining his new reforms for the Supreme Court, which he said has now been hijacked by extremists.
In recent years, extreme opinions that the Supreme Court has handed down have undermined long-established civil rights principles and protections. In 2022, the court overruled Roe v. Wade and the right to choose that had been the law of the land for 50 years. 50 years. The following year, the same court eviscerated affirmative action, which had been upheld and reaffirmed for nearly 50 years as well.
The reforms include an 18-year term limit for justices, as well as a new binding code of conduct.
I believe the best structure is the 18-year term limit. That would help ensure the country would not have what it has now. An extreme court that's proud of an attack on the confirmation process that's been weaponized by those seeking to carry out an extreme agenda for decades to come. The Supreme Court's current ethics code is weak and, even more frightening, voluntary. Under the reform I propose, justice would be required to disclose gifts, refrain from public political activity, recuse themselves in cases in which they or their spouses have a financial or other conflict of interest.
Biden is also calling for a new constitutional amendment undoing the court's recent ruling on presidential immunity.
I'm calling for a constitutional amendment called No One is Above the Law Amendment. It holds, and I mean this sincerely, it holds that there's no immunity for crimes former president committed while in office.
House Speaker Mike Johnson slammed Biden's proposals, accusing him of trying to, quote, delegitimize the court, saying Biden's reforms are dead on arrival in the House.
And elsewhere, the FBI plans to interview former President Donald Trump as a witness to his assassination attempt. The interview seeks to find out more about what happened on that day in Butler, Pennsylvania, from Trump's perspective. So far, the FBI has conducted 450 interviews about Thomas Crooks, the deceased shooter of the former president. Based on the interviews, the FBI said that Crooks was deemed highly intelligent, but had few friends and mainly socialized with his parents. While the FBI has not found a motive for the young man, investigators say he had planned the attack months in advance. According to the FBI, the 20-year-old's parents had been extremely cooperative with the investigations and said they knew nothing about their son's plans. The FBI confirmed that they found no reason to doubt their testimony.
Meanwhile, questions are still being raised about what exactly went wrong on the day of the Trump shooting, with the local SWAT team now blaming a complete breakdown in communication. The officers tell ABC News that they didn't have any communication with Secret Service, that is, until after the shooting itself.
We were supposed to get a face-to-face briefing with the Secret Service snipers whenever they arrived, and that never happened. So I think that was probably a pivotal point where I started thinking things were wrong, because that never happened, and we had no communication with the Secret Service.
You had no communication with the Secret Service at all on that Saturday?
No, not until after the shooting, I believe. Yeah.
And by then?
It was too late.
Text messages between the snipers showed they were suspicious of the shooter about an hour before the attempted assassination and tried to alert their fellow team members.
We had a text group between the local snipers that were on scene. I had sent those pictures out to that group and advised them of what I noticed and what I'd seen.
What do you think is transpiring once you send in what you've sent in?
I assumed that there would be somebody coming out to, speak with this individual or, find out what's going on.
So how do you know if Greg's concerns about Crooks are being relayed properly?
We don't. We have to assume that when he put that information out to command, that command took that information and did something with it. We don't know if they did.
Secret Service told ABC News it's committed to better understanding what happened and said it's completely cooperating with the investigation.
And still on the same topic, Meta's AI tool says that Trump's assassination attempt is fictional. The New York Post conducted an online search yesterday asking Meta's AI assistant if Trump's assassination attempt was fictional, to which the bot replied, "There was no real assassination attempt of Donald Trump. I strive to provide accurate and reliable information, but sometimes mistakes can occur." While AI details around Trump remain murky, the bot has no problem giving information on Kamala Harris's campaign, which it deemed a real and ongoing event. Of course, the bizarre disparity in information and a lack of transparency regarding the AI search engine sparked fury among conservative social media users. However, the Post noted that generating different questions in Meta's AI assistant did give accurate information on Trump's assassination attempt. Meta also said that they are working on fixing glitches in the system.
Yeah, something very important to get right ahead of this election, as more and more people are going to start using these AI systems to gather information. So you really want to get it right.
Yeah, hopefully they will.
Yeah, we'll see. Meanwhile, shifting our gears away from Donald Trump to Kamala Harris, where left-wing activists are fast at work organizing for the vice president, holding Zoom calls dedicated to various demographics. The latest was last night's so-called White Dudes for Harris event, which, according to the organizers, would, quote, welcome Vice President Harris to the presidential race and pledge to help her get elected. Take a look.
Masculinity as a trope has been co-opted by the MAGA right into something that feeds into and exacerbates the loneliness epidemic, as well as the mental health crisis that many face that end up leading to really destructive behaviors. We aren't the only ones that are hurt by these things. Black and brown people, LGBTQIA plus people, especially trans women and indigenous people.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg headlined that event, which raised over $4 million for the Harris campaign. It follows last Thursday's successful Zoom call for white women, hosted by liberal influencer Ariel Fodor.
As white women, we need to use our privilege to make positive changes. If you find yourself talking over or speaking for BIPOC individuals, or God forbid, correcting them, just take a beat. A lot of the times, being an ally means being willing to be uncomfortable. And no one is more uncomfy than someone talking to their bigoted family members. Over half of white people, or almost half of white people, voted for Donald Trump both times he ran for president. So you know someone that you need to talk to.
The meetings follow similar calls addressing black women and black men, as well as Latinos and LGBT Americans. All right, and coming up next, we continue with more election-related news where intelligence officials say Iran is trying to undermine the Trump campaign. The details on that and more after this short break. Stay tuned.
Are you new to biblically responsible investing? As Christians, we have the responsibility to be good stewards of the money God has entrusted us with. As we invest in the market, we want to make sure that the companies we invest in aren't taking money and using it to fund industries that grieve the heart of God, like pornography, abortion, gambling, or the LGBT agenda. That doesn't mean a company must be a Christian company to be biblically responsible. It means that company is solely focused on excellence in its industry and doesn't support things that God hates. To learn more about biblically responsible investing and how you can put it to practice in your portfolio, go to financialissues.org.
The mission of Financial Issues is to expose Jesus for all he is, all he means, and all that he can do.
On the day I found I was pregnant, I was full of emotions, and I just was so overwhelmed, and I don't know if I'm ready for this huge, life-altering, changing commitment. I had individuals around me not wanting me to have this child. And somehow, and I was driving, and I saw the Women's Help Center sign, and I immediately turned in. That just took relief off of me, and I was like, you know what? It's gonna be okay. They gave me the confidence and the support that I needed to be able to go out and face the world. First time I held Finnegan, I just lit up with joy. I was so excited. This little boy that I had in my life, he is loving and generous. Watching him just grow and flourish into this incredible human being has just been so rewarding and so uplifting. Looking back, I don't know what I would do without him because I needed him more than I think he needed me.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, yesterday, U.S. intelligence officials announced that they believe the Iranian government is working to sabotage the campaign of former President Donald Trump. While the officials did not go into detail on the alleged Iranian interference, officials confirmed that they observed Tehran working to influence the presidential election through online influence operations. According to intelligence sources, Iran has been working to undermine former President Trump since the 2020 election. However, American spies reportedly haven't observed a shift in Iran's preferences during that time. The announcement comes after Iran was accused earlier this month of plotting to assassinate former President Donald Trump. Iran has since denied the allegations.
And while America's enemies are on the move, such as Iran, national security experts released a sobering warning yesterday saying the U.S. is not prepared to fight a major war, even though they say the chances of fighting one are now at an 80-year high. That's the unanimous conclusion of a bipartisan group appointed by Congress to assess the nation's military readiness. The report reads like this, quote, "The nation was last prepared for such a fight during the Cold War, which ended 35 years ago. It is not prepared today." The panel referenced threats from Russia, China, and the Middle East, such as Iran. The experts blame the Pentagon, Congress, and multiple White House administrations for being slow to respond.
And speaking of a major conflict, concerns of war in the Middle East continue to rise. We go to FISM's Ian Patrick for more information.
The tension between the Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon and the Israeli military forces continues to climb. And despite assertions to the contrary, other nations seem to be confident that a wider war is on the horizon. The IDF recently hit targets in Lebanon as a retaliation for a previous strike in the Golan Heights. That attack resulted in the deaths of 12 children, although Hezbollah denied responsibility for the strike in Israel. Still, Israel is reportedly planning a stronger strike in the near future, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu indicating that, quote, Hezbollah will pay a heavy price, which it has not paid up to now. And this has certainly increased the tension in the region and sent many nations into a panic. But Israel is attempting to set the record straight by assuring others that it does not want all-out war in the Middle East. Four Israeli officials gave details on what Israel was planning with regards to Hezbollah and Lebanon. They said Israel was certainly preparing for possible fighting after the attack on Golan Heights and its subsequent attack on southern Lebanon. The officials did not give any details on its future plans, but overall, one of the sources did say that it is not in our interest to engage in an all-out war with the rest of the Middle East. Still, the increased tension has many concerned of a looming crisis in Lebanon. On Monday, the U.S. Embassy in Beirut issued a video on social media urging Americans in the nation to have travel plans in place and to make sure that their passports are renewed.
The U.S. Department of State has no higher priority than the safety and security of U.S. citizens overseas. As we continue to monitor the complex and quickly changing situation, I want to take this opportunity to remind you about a few key points on crisis preparedness. We recommend U.S. citizens develop a crisis plan of action and leave before a crisis begins. Regularly scheduled commercial transportation is always the best option while local communications and transportation infrastructure are intact and operating normally. Please make sure that your U.S. passports are valid for at least 6 months. If not, you should make an appointment to renew your U.S. passport through the U.S. Embassy website.
Other embassies in the capital of Beirut, including the UK, are also reportedly urging its staff and citizens to prepare for certain contingencies. But unfortunately, some of those contingencies could be disrupted by the airline industry. Flights into and out of Beirut were canceled or delayed on Monday following the attacks in Israel and Lebanon. Airlines including Air France, Lufthansa, and Ethiopian Air, among a few others, have suspended flights for the next few days, citing the attacks. Some flights could be grounded until August 5th, although this does depend on conditions within Lebanon. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
Thanks so much for those updates, Ian. Meanwhile, tempers are also hot as Turkey and Israel spar over controversial comments recently made by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a senior Turkish official. He warned yesterday that those who threaten the president, quote, do so at their own peril. It comes as the pro-Palestinian president sparked outrage on Sunday when he seemingly threatened to invade Israel in televised remarks.
We need to be very strong so that Israel cannot do these ridiculous things to Palestine. Just as we entered Karabakh, just as we entered Libya, we can do something similar to them.
Israel's foreign minister fired back, accusing Erdogan of following in the footsteps of slain Iraqi leader and terrorist Saddam Hussein. He also called for Turkey to be expelled from NATO over those comments.
Meanwhile, in some tragic news coming out of England, 3 children are dead and 11 other people are wounded after a savage stabbing spree in Southport, north of Liverpool. Most of the victims are children who were part of a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. 2 adults remain in critical condition after shielding their students. The attack is believed to be carried out by a 17-year-old male, and authorities have arrested the teenager but say his motive is not clear. The British Prime Minister called the attack horrendous and deeply shocking, and it's the latest knife attack as Britain grapples with the rise in stabbings. This has led to calls for the government to crack down on bladed weapons. Prime Minister Keir Starmer was heckled earlier today as he laid flowers at the latest attack site.
How many more children are going to die in our streets, Prime Minister? How many more children? How many more children, Prime Minister? Are we going to do something?
Time to change, Starmer.
Come on, it's needed. How many more children? Is it mine next? What's changed?
And turning our attention now to South America, where thousands of Venezuelans are taking to the streets to protest the alleged results of the nation's hotly disputed election. Official results show that the country's socialist dictator, that would be President Nicolas Maduro, easily won re-election, but his opposition leader, Edmundo Gonzalez, has since claimed that his party now has proof that Maduro did not win the election. Yesterday, Gonzalez told reporters that his party has over 70% of the tally sheets, which he says show he received more than double the votes of Maduro. The disputed results have been a source of contention with foreign governments, including the United States, and in response, Venezuela has now cut diplomatic ties with 7 countries that are questioning the election, including Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, Peru, Panama, Uruguay, and the Dominican Republic. Okay, and up next, the national debt. We'll get to that, which continues to grow at a jaw-dropping rate. But first, we go back in time with Seth Udinsky for a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In November of 1963, the world watched as the United States scrambled to deal with one of its most dramatic and devastating public assassinations in its history. The popular and beloved John F. Kennedy was dead, gunned down in what many historians believe to be a conspiracy that has gone unsolved to this day. Regardless of the truth of the killer, the country needed to move forward with little choice but to follow the next man up. Kennedy's lesser known, but in many ways equally controversial running mate, the strong-willed Texan who would serve as the nation's 36th president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Johnson was born in 1908 and married in 1934. He entered the House of Representatives before World War II, but like his forebear Kennedy, he served during the war with honors in the South Pacific before re-entering politics after the war. Now, he jumped from the lower chamber to the upper in 1948, where he would become Senate Minority Leader, and then in 1954, Senate Majority Leader upon a Democrat retake of the upper chamber. With plenty of political clout, Johnson was poised to be a candidate for the vice presidency, which came about when Kennedy chose him for his victorious 1960 election bid. While Kennedy and Johnson appeared to be a strong duo publicly, historians have since speculated that the two men were not always the best of pals and had some rivalry between them. This rivalry was rather subdued but became increasingly more public after John's death, as Johnson became estranged with John's brother, Robert. Now, during his presidency, Johnson pushed to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which he succeeded in doing so that year, the same year he won his only election bid. Johnson was a complex figure. His legacy is tied intimately to his leadership over the nation during the Vietnam War, which quickly came to dominate the press during his only full term in office. Now, had he orchestrated a clear victory in the war, perhaps his legacy would be more positive today, but he was unable to do so. By 1968, the nation was reaching fever-pitch levels. Civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in the spring of that year, and 2 months later, Johnson's rival Bobby Kennedy, who was on the rise as a potential rival in the Democratic Party for president, was also gunned down. Johnson chose voluntarily to bow out of the '68 election, and he lived several more years before his death in 1973 at the age of 64. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common: the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
But I felt very comfortable in that decision because I found a lot of support. Like, everyone here, always made sure, keep in contact with me. This is what ultimately changed my decision, knowing that I had all this support that I didn't know I had. Now that he's here and he's 4 months old, I look at him and I honestly, it just makes me want to cry.
And welcome back to FISM News. Well, let's continue with the Treasury Department announcing that for the first time, the U.S. national debt hit $35 trillion. According to the predictions of the U.S. Congressional Budget Office, America is set to reach $56 trillion in debt by 2034. They attributed this number to rising levels of spending and interest expenses, which the tax revenue cannot match. Federal programs such as the Employee Retention Tax Credit and the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 have been more costly than expected, according to the New York Times. While the debt has been inflated by Democrat policies in the last few years, liberal politicians blame Republicans for wanting to downsize federal spending. Instead, the White House touts President Biden's proposed $3 trillion deficit reduction, focusing on taxing the rich more and cutting spending on special interests.
And sadly, it's going to be very soon. We're just going to be reporting the next headline that it's now reached 36, then 37, then 38, and so on. Yeah.
And then no one seems to really be doing anything about it.
I know. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in New York, a judge has now ruled yesterday against appointing an outside monitor for the National Rifle Association, or NRA. The ruling stems from a charge brought by New York AG Letitia James on grounds of financial mismanagement among NRA leaders. The judge said a financial monitor in this case would be simply too time-consuming and costly for the NRA, saying it could be so much so that it could dissolve the association. However, the judge did ban former CEO Wayne LaPierre from employment with the organization for up to 10 years, and he was also ordered to pay back over $4 million as well. Meanwhile, the NRA's retired finance chief also must repay $2 million, officially ending a 4-year court battle.
And in some other legal news, the Biden administration is still cracking down on pro-life advocates. A young mother was just sentenced to 3 years and 5 months in prison for violating the FACE Act. According to the DOJ, Bevelyn Beatty Williams was convicted in a Manhattan federal court for interfering with an abortion facility and its workers. Williams was preaching the gospel outside the building, where she allegedly blocked the entrance and injured an abortion worker's hands. A statement from her fundraising page reads, quote, "I was persecuted as a Christian standing for my beliefs when it comes to life." She added the punishment did not fit the alleged crime and that the concern of being a young mother and a stay-at-home mother was completely disregarded. Life News reports that since 2022, Biden's DOJ went after at least 22 pro-life advocates for protesting peacefully outside abortion clinics.
Yeah, and we reported on quite a few of those. They are truly disturbing situations. Meanwhile, a bit further north in the Northeast, Massachusetts is now becoming a major bellwether for the ongoing migrant crisis, as new reporting from the Boston Herald now suggests nearly 500,000 working-age Massachusetts residents are not proficient in English. That's about 10% of the state's entire workforce. The data comes from 2022 estimates, meaning the number could actually be much higher today in 2024. It comes as Republicans have been ramping up their pressure on Vice President Kamala Harris as President Biden's so-called border czar, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, is now coming to Harris's defense, saying the border crisis needs to be solved by Congress. At the same time, Warren also wants a pathway to citizenship for the over 11 million illegal immigrants currently in the U.S.
This is a problem that ultimately has to be solved by Congress. We need the tools in order to have more resources at the border, to have more resources in the states and cities that are supporting migrants, and I believe we need to create a pathway to citizenship. All of that is a part of what we need to do for comprehensive immigration reform. Kamala Harris will work with Congress and get that done.
The plan is in stark contrast to that of Donald Trump, who is currently vowing mass deportation for illegal immigrants.
And lastly, the U.S. male Olympic gymnasts made history earlier this week after they won bronze, making it the first time in 16 years that the U.S. men's gymnastics team has won an Olympic medal. The team beat the UK and Ukraine, but finished behind gold medalists from Japan and silver medalists from China. Team director and silver medalist Brett McClure told reporters, quote, "I can't even describe it. I was rooting for them the whole way, and every routine just kept getting better and better." Meanwhile, Paris officials canceled training for the Olympic triathlon for the second straight day yesterday. Citing poor water quality, the officials blocked athletes from practicing in Paris's Seine River, where the event is scheduled. Organizers claim that although the water quality was too poor for practice, they are confident it will be ready when the event begins. And we can only hope that's true.
We'll just have to wait and see about that. There's been some pretty nasty reports concerning that river. So, I'd be a little wary if I was an athlete and they say, you know what, well, it's been pretty nasty these last couple of weeks, but now it's good to go. It'd be pretty convenient. I'd be skeptical.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us. And please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
And for more updates until our next show, you probably know the drill, but you can find us on social media or you can also download the FISM app. Thanks so much. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow night with more news coverage. We'll see you then.